Between 1957 and 1958, Picasso realized the largest and arguably the highest profile work of his whole career. A huge mural he was commissioned for the newly built headquarters of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization in Paris, also known as UNESCO, a painting that came to be known as the Fall of Icarus. Built between 1955 and 1958, UNESCO House was designed by the Hungarian architect Marcel Breuer with the Italian Pierluigi Nervi and the French Bernard Zerfus, and became one of the major architectural projects realized in the wake of the Second World War on an international scale. And since it was conceived by the architect as they wanted it to become a totalizing union of the arts, the works that were commissioned for the building became very, very central. And so after much debate within the advisory committee in charge of the commissions that the organization would pass, Picasso was selected for one of the most important locations, a large wall in the lobby of the General Conference building. So Picasso received the commission in 1955, but it was not until 2 years later, so in December 1957, that he actually started to develop his first ideas for the mural. The conception and execution of this work was very complicated, as we know, and it took place behind closed doors at Picasso's residence in Cannes, Villa La Californie. And since this work was mostly inaccessible and not documented, we are very, very lucky here at the Museo Picasso Málaga to be able to exhibit some of the preparatory drawings that the artists realized that are now in Faba's collection. And so for this first rotation of works that you see here, because they are works on paper, they are fragile, they can only be exhibited for a few months, so there will be multiple rotations throughout the length of the exhibition. In this first rotation, we see, we kind of move from the very first drawing, so early December 1957, to the final maquette, the final composition, which is kind of achieved at the very end of January 1958. So if we now look closely at the first drawing here, this is kind of the very first drawing out of over 80 studies, preparatory studies that exist for the UNESCO composition. And here Picasso kind of crystallized his preliminary vision of what this composition should look like. So here you can see that we are in the space of the atelier, in an enclosed space. Here on the right we can see the shadow or the silhouette of the artist, recognizable because he's holding a palette with brushes. Then very prominently at the center we see a canvas with this kind of very strange, bizarre, barely human beings, but we can quite easily read as a scene of bathing at the beach or at the pool. And you see how the space overall is structured in a kind of a cubist fashion, with planes that kind of overlap and interlock, thanks to Picasso's very sophisticated use of watercolor glazes. And each figure is then the outlines are traced very clearly with a blue pen, so that that is still visible in transparency. The lighting of the atelier is quite dramatic, and you can see that this huge canvas casts a shadow on what's on the left-hand side of the composition, where we can see this kind of very cartoonish female figure lying on a couch. She's truly rendered in a cubist way, so almost like split up, exploded in a number of geometric shapes. And she's almost fusing and becoming one and the same with the canvas on an easel that we see behind her, and we might wonder whether that's what the painter, the artist, is about to do, to kind of portray her in the canvas whose back we see. Two things. So the theme of the atelier was crucial throughout Picasso's career. He went back to it multiple times, especially when he was struggling to create a work. The atelier had been the point of departure of his other great mural, Guernica, and when he started to work on the UNESCO commission, he also went back to that space, the space of artistic creation itself. And it should not be forgotten also that from mid-August to December 1957, Picasso worked on a large series of mostly canvases inspired by Velázquez's masterpiece Las Meninas, which is also a painting that's about the artist's studio and the figure of the artist itself. Here we will see is kind of the subject of the very first drawings up until early January. So if we now move to this second drawing, and we can also keep the two in mind because we see there's clear iconographic similarities. We're still in the space of the atelier. Here in early January, so Picasso finally left behind the kind of grisile palette that had dominated the first studies, and which is of course the palette of Guernica. So it's also kind of leaving behind that idea of what a mural painting should look like, but the composition is more or less the same. We see instead of the artist has disappeared, and there's this kind of very decorative plant. The reclining female nude has become has more sinuous shapes and has become more more reminiscent of how Picasso in the 1930s portrayed Marie-Thérèse Voltaire. And so as he was working on the UNESCO Commission, so something really monumental that would stay and that he would remember for, he kind of adopted also retrospective gaze and looked back at the history of art and also at his own history. So that's why sometimes we find elements in these studies that look at very different moments in Picasso's own career. So if we talk a little bit more about this central canvas, which is kind of the key to understanding the whole composition, what is this? So it's kind of a visual figure of speech, because it is basically a painting within the painting, and it represents a work by Picasso, a canvas that actually exists from 1957. It's called Bagnères à la Garoupe. It's now in Geneva. And so it's basically a form of self-citation that Picasso is employing. But interestingly, that canvas also has a very strange, very specific creative process, because Picasso, to create it, and to paint it, Picasso moved from a group of sculptures known as the Bathers. He realized them in 1957 using pieces of salvaged wood that he assembled to create these kind of very flat planar sculptures. And what he would do is in his atelier at La Californie, he would place them in front of a large canvas, lit them with a spotlight, and trace the outline, the shadows, and paint them. So it's like it was also going back to kind of the foundational myths of how painting was born in ancient times, like by tracing an outline, the outline of a shadow, of a figure. So the Bathers are truly one of the keys to understand how Picasso was kind of thinking through the composition that would become the UNESCO mural. If we then move to the final maquette, we see that the scene changes completely. So here it's we're like more clearly outdoors. we can see that, you know, prominently the blue color of the sea. Here we can see it's only partly colored, but this is clearly a shore with some figures that are sitting on it or standing. There is this kind of quite unsettling like figure that's kind of plunging into or diving into the sea, and we have some other elements that we'll briefly talk about. But I wanted to invite you to see, to notice how basically the solution of the painting within the painting that he used in the first studies, basically that painting, and Picasso himself said it really well, the painting basically swallowed up the entire picture, so that there was nothing left but the painting. So here we have just the bathers, basically. We are looking at a scene of bathing, very abstract, of course, very unusual in many ways, but it's like it's gotten rid completely of any sense of the atelier, of an enclosed space, and it's kind of an open space. When he started working on the maquette, so this is the final maquette that Picasso then used to paint. You see, there's many numbers on it, and those mark the 40 distinct panels that Picasso painted personally and that would compose the mural assembled at Unesco. So the idea was that, you know, he would be able to work on each of them at La Californie, and these panels would then be shipped to Paris and installed. And so you see how the grid, this structure that was provided, also conceived in collaboration with the UNESCO architects, it truly provides a structure for the whole composition. We see that these figures are, some of them are more clearly reminiscent of the bathers. For example, this is a female figure with outstretched arms that looks also very similar to a sculpture that's displayed here in the exhibition in a gallery nearby. The standing bather looks a lot like those that you can see in the other studies. Then there's the other figures that are, I don't know, just studies. These seem like outstretched arms or legs. We don't know whether he was thinking of depicting another diver and then changed his mind. And the interesting aspect about this maquette is that it became a working tool for Picasso, and he started working on it, creating paper cutouts that he would literally pin to the actual maquette to test different solutions of the composition. Sometimes, of course, when he felt convinced enough, I believe that he just drew the figure and considered it definitive. But some of these little cutouts that are really fragile, because they're just like working tools, still survive. And if you look closely at the drawing, you see that it's pierced, and that's because Picasso, like I said, pinned these pieces of paper on it. So interestingly, the work on the UNESCO mural also became generative for further paintings. For example, some elements that are not in the final composition, such as this figure picking flowers. So Picasso did actually paint the two panels where the figure was supposed to be, but then it apparently didn't like those, and so it's now a separate and independent work that's in the collection of the Museo Picasso in Paris. So it became a kind of a workshop and a very generative process, the one behind the UNESCO mural. And so you see all these dates from 18th of January to the 29th, they demonstrate how also labored so he really struggled to get to the final composition, and so he worked, he changed it day by day until he kind of got to what the final solution would be. I encourage you to look closely also at this kind of plunging figure. It looks like basically just a barely human figure with a white skeleton and mostly black. And that's the so-called Icarus, that's been read as a fallen Icarus. And that's why the mural is still known as the Fall of Icarus. In my view, and especially after having studied extensively the preparatory drawings, this seems to be an interpretation that's only been added retrospectively by a good friend of Picasso and a person that was involved in the advisory committee of UNESCO called Georges Salle, who kind of tried to give a sort of a classical pedigree to the mural, but I leave it to you also as a question to figure out what that figure might mean, what might represent, and how does it make you feel. It's in between, it's kind of unsettling because we don't understand whether it's human, it belongs to the realm of animals, of plants, it's something in between, and that's why its presence so central, the composition still gives an unsettling effect.